Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk to you about world space canvases. These are different to virtual buttons that you've used in the tutorials, which are buttons that you put your hand or finger over the real world object to trigger a button press. And instead, these ones will appear on the screen or on the phone screen, and they're a little bit easier to work with. Virtual buttons, you'll have found, are a little bit finicky, a little bit difficult to detect, whereas world space buttons are pretty straightforward to work with. And with world space buttons, you can go further than this. You could have world space sliders, world space text, that sort of thing. This is a really common way of basically anything that you can do on a Unity UI, you can do on a world space canvas. So let me first show you how to get that working. The project that I've got at the moment doesn't have Vuforia in it, so you have to imagine that this square that I've got here is your image target. What you need to do is you need to right-click on the image target or your square. In my case, it's a square. And you can choose UI and then Canvas. Once you've done that, this actually creates what's called a screen space canvas, if you can see where my mouse is pointing. And you'll notice there's this little white, well, it's actually a gigantic white box has been created. That's because this is the size of the actual monitor, 1920 by 1080. So it's 1,900 meters wide. That's not what we want. We want one that's about, a few centimeters wide. So the way that we change that is we go from screen space to world space. So by making it world space, we also should select your camera. You would check your AR camera here. I'm just going to use my normal camera because I don't have an AR project. The problem is, even though I've gone to world space, this thing is gigantic. So the best thing to do here is to reset all the transform positions. So the first step is to set the position X to 0, position Y to 0, and the position Z to 0. I recommend also reducing the width just a little bit. Maybe a good width to work with is 200 by 200. And then you might also adjust the rotation for now to 0. And the scale is also something that you'd want to set to, I recommend starting off with, I think 0.05 is the first number I'll try. And we can see that we're getting into something that's a bit better, but actually 0.01 at least is what we're after here for each one of those numbers. Basically, you're trying to get it to the point where you see this little white rectangle outlining your image target. And so now, this is where you would now refer to any other tutorial that you can find or resource you can find about Unity UI. At this point, it's got nothing to do with AR. It's more about just using the Unity UI system. So let me just quickly show you an example of what this should actually look like, because at the moment, this wouldn't do anything. If we go into the UI, and I'll add a button. So I'll do a Text Mesh Pro button, but you could just do a legacy button as well if you want. But I'll do a Text Mesh Pro button because many of you will choose that. Text Mesh Pro is just nicer looking text. So we can import, because it's the first time I'm using Text Mesh Pro, and we'll give that just a second. And there we go, there's my button. And so you can now move things around on that world space canvas like this. And I recommend using the last tool, second last tool here for the rect tool for changing the size and that sort of thing of buttons on your screen. So maybe I want 2 buttons. I've just duplicated one there by pressing Control D. And now I've got an interface that would move around with the square. So what I haven't shown you yet is that if this, you'll have to imagine that the square moves around using the AR camera, because again, I don't have Vuforia on this project. As it moves around, your buttons will move around with it. And just as a side note, that previous canvas that I showed you there that had screen space, you can use that, however, it won't move around with the object. It'll just appear as an overlay over the whole game as long as you have that image target visible. At this point is where you would also then want to work out how to use, if you're using buttons, is how to use the on-click listener. And I'll just spend a couple minutes showing you how to do that with a really basic example. So let me just quickly add to my image target another 3D object. And it's going to be a sphere. And it's going to be a little bit squished. I apologize because of the example that I'm doing here, but that's okay. I'm just going to squish it, make it small, and so it appears like this. And so maybe this is not a good example, but it shows you how you can link up actions with buttons, is that I'm going to make it so my sphere is disabled or not visible at all. It's going to be a disabled game object. Actually, sorry, I just realized this isn't going to work as a sample because 3D models appear and disappear with the image target. So I'm going to have to do something slightly different here. And I'm just going to pause while I think about that. Okay, so I've come up with a dumb idea for showing an example of what a button could do. It's going to be that when we click on one of these buttons, it's going to change the sphere to be red. And so just to quickly make it so that happens, I'm going to create a new material called red. I'm going to change the color to be red. And so if this was on the sphere, right, the sphere would appear to be a red object. I'm just previewing that here, but I'm going to not do that. If we want our button to do something, we should use our on-click listener. And I encourage you to take a look at actual tutorials about how to use these. But you can click the little plus button for on-click, and then there's a confusing interface. But the first thing you need to do is link up the object that you want to do an action on. So I'm going to link my sphere to the button by clicking and dragging from that sphere to that part of the on-click listener. Then you can select any component on that object and make it do something. So I haven't got a very complicated project here, but if you had scripts attached to your object, they would appear here as well. So you could run any function from your own scripts. I'm just going to run a built-in function on the mesh renderer, which is to set the material of this one. The details don't matter too much for this because you're probably not going to do my exact example. And I'm going to drag in the red material for this button. And the button is the left-hand one. I'm not going to do something for the right button. And so now we're just going to quickly make sure that this actually works. So to do that, I need to fake my camera here for a second. So I'm going to rotate my camera, and I'm going to move my camera around a little bit until it's in the spot that I want, just so that I can see my world space canvas. So this looks a little bit like an AR. It's not a real one. So here we go. I'm going to quickly run the game, and I'm going to click the left button, and it will turn my sphere, or it's more like an egg at the moment, red when I click on it. And there it is. And you can see that this interface, these buttons, hopefully you can see that the color changes as I click on them. These are things that can be interacted with. And just to quickly show you what else you can do here, anything under the UI menu, so you can do things like sliders, you can do text, so that's a different way of doing text to what you've already been shown in the tutorials. You can write any text in there. You can have, as we've already seen, buttons, sliders, toggle boxes, things like that. And I'd encourage you to take a look online for those. If you have any questions about how this is done, feel free to shoot me a message on Discord. But the main thing here was that we made a new canvas and set the render mode to world space, reset all the canvas values, and importantly set the scale to 0.01 so that it fits on the image target. This value worked for me, but you might need to find the appropriate value for your one. Okay, thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the tutorials.